So we're holding 2B2, okay? Bays Amid Bays on the bottom, second to last line.
Okay.
Bays Amid Bays, 2B2, the second to last line. The line that starts with Rav Ashi Omar. Okay,
right.
So now the Gemara, the Mishnah, and the Gemara has made it very clear that the 7-day sequestering is for Yom Kippur and for the Parah Aduma, and they're tied to the sequestration or the sequestering that took place by the Miluyim, otherwise known as the inauguration in the wilderness, in the Midbar, in the second year, which started on Chafei Adar, went for 7 days, which were not holy, and then in last week's parsha, Uvayoim Hashmini, and on the 8th day was the Chanukah Samishkan. And in the 7 days prior to that, Aaron was isolated, was sequestered for holiness purposes, etc. And we learned from there the same thing applies to Yom Kippur, with the Kohen Gadol is required to do the Avodah. The same thing with regard to the Parah Aduma, right? That 7 days prior, the Kohen that was going to be used to deal with the Parah Aduma was sequestered. So then then we've started going back and forth. Who says it's Yom Kippur? Maybe it's Rosh Hashanah. Maybe it's all regels. And now we got to Shmini Hatzeres. Okay, we said maybe it's talking about Shmini Atzeres, right? And not Yom Kippur. So Rav Ashi Omar, why would we even have a hava in our thought to think that the parts that we would require sequestering the Kohen for Shmini Atzeres? Rav Ashi Omar, could it be that the main body of the Yontif does not require being sequestered? Tofal Didei Boya Parisha, while the subordinate does require them being sequestered, i.e., you have the 7 days of Sukkot, and at the end of it, we stick in this extra day because the Eibishter said, Kosha Olai Pridaschem. It's hard for me to leave you, so let me hang around for one more day. So that was Shmini Atzeres. It's hard for me to leave. So Shmini Atzeres is a 1 day compared to the 7 days of Sukkot. And the 7 days of Sukkot, I don't need sequestering. Why would I think that the Kohen would require sequestering for the avodah of Shmini Atzeres? And says the Gemara, but even according to the Mandi Yoma, that says Shmini Atzeres, in fact, is an independent Yom Tov. It is not attached to Sukkot. It's a Yom Tov in its own right. We are on Gimel Omid Aleph 3A1. That's only got to do with Pazir Kishav. Pay is the pious, the lottery. All Sukkot, where they brought so many kabbanis for the 70 nations. What they did was that all 24 mashmayris of Ganim, all 24 groups of Ganim came together, and on a rotation basis, they would go ahead and parcel out the avodah for the 7 days of Sukkot. Masha'enkein on Shmini Atzeres, they went back to the lottery. They did a lottery to determine which family would be and which kohen would get the avodah of Shmini Atzeres. That's the pay. The Zayin is, of course, Zaman that we say Shechianu. Reish is regel because it's a regel on itself. As you know, in Shul, what do we say? We say Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh. We switch in Yalav Yovoy from Chag Sukkot to Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh. The kuf is carbon because on Shmini Atzeres you only bring one bull. Masha'enkein on Sukkot you bring a lot of bulls each day. The shin is the shir shel yain, which was lamanatzeach ala sheminis, the lamanatzeach of the 8th, which we bang into many times in Tehillim. And the base is a bracha that the oilam on Shmini Atzeres they would drench the melech. That what he called Shmini Atzeres that it's a long life and a good year. So That's what Shmini Atzeres is. According to the Mount Yomi, the Shmini Atzeres is the Yom Tov for itself. That has to do for Pazer Kishav. Avol Indian Tashlumin, but regard to compensation Tashlumin the Rishayu. It is a Tashlumin actually of the first day of Sukkot. It's still attached to Sukkot. What are we talking about? A compensation of what? The hard it's not because we learned somebody who did not bring his carbon chagiga on the first day of Sukkot, but in fact, the first day of any of the Yom Tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. If you're supposed to bring a carbon chagiga on the first day. In other words, an oilus regel. You're supposed a chagiga, a carbon simcha, an offering of joy, a chagiga, and you didn't bring it. You're allowed 7 days to compensate. You get 7 days to cover for it. That means on Pesach, you get the rest of Yom Tov, all the way to the last day of Yom Tov. On Shavuos, you actually get the weekdays. Since Shavuos in reality is only 1 day, even though we hold 2, but it's 1 day, you get 7 days of the weekdays. And on Sukkot, you go all the way, says the Gemara. That means one is allowed to offer the chagiga anytime throughout the whole Sukkot. And on the last day of Sukkot, i.e. Shmini Atzeres. So Shmini Atzeres, on the one hand, has things that make it a Yom Tov unto itself. But on the other hand, for one very important purpose, Tashlumin of the Chagiga, it is clearly attached to Sukkot. So you see, it's not such a freebie. So therefore, it's impossible to say that Shmini Atzeres, which at the end of the day is subordinate to Sukkot, because it is a Tashlumin of Sukkot, should it require sequestration. Masha'enken, Sukkot itself should not require for the client to be sequestered. Since that doesn't make any sense, clearly the pasuk cannot be talking about Shmini.
So is that the way? Is that the way we?
Go ahead. Is that the way?
So that's
again.
That's the way we hold.
Yes, we hold that on the one hand, it's a mixture. Shmini Atzeres. Right. In fact, I'll even take it to you further. You know that there are people that sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, right? I don't know what your minhag is. Do you know why? Okay, so there are people. Why do people sit in the sukkah? Why do people sit in the sukkah?
And then you're out.
And the answer for that is, why do you sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres? If you think about it, we have 2 days of sukkahs at the beginning because of Sveika de Yoma, because we're not sure. So what happens if the second day of sukkahs is really the first day of sukkahs? Count 7 days from there. What's the 7th day?
Shmini
Atzeres. So there are people that sit in the sukkah, Shmini Atzeres, without a bracha, because it's a suffix, but they'll sit and eat in the sukkah. So my minhag is, we find ourselves in the sukkah. In other words, I play it down the middle. I find myself in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres if I can, weather permitting. That's how we do it. Because on the one hand, Shmini Atzeres is a Yom Tov Lifnei Atzmai. On the other hand, it's attached to Sukkot because of the Sveika the Yoma of Sukkot. Because I'm not sure when Sukkot begins, because that's why we have 2 days versus Eretz Yisrael, and it's 1 day. So now with Tashlumin, it's 2 things Tashlumin at the time of the Karban Chagiga, the worse, right? So it actually, Shmini Atzeres is a very, very confusing Yom Tov.
But in Israel, it's not confusing.
It's true, but Legabe Tashlumin, for the Karban, it's the thing. And also, as the Gemara explains in other places, what is Shmini Atzeres? Hashem says, Kosher alai pitaschen. It's hard for me to leave. So what do you mean leaving? Leaving Sukkot. So I'm extending my stay for Sukkot. So is he extending Sukkot, or is he doing this? And the truth is, it should be pointed out that this that we have Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, that is a new phenomenon. You will not find Simchas Torah in the Shas, in the Talmud. It showed up somehow within, it may have been as late as the Rishonim. It may not even have been in the time of the Goyim. I'm not sure. This may have been much later in the 11th, 12th hundreds that they did it. And because it's always been the great question, why do we do Simchas Torah on Simchas Torah? We should do it on Shavuos. Logically, it should be done on Shavuos.
Correct.
Right? So that is always one of the great discussions about Shavuos. On Shavuos, we accepted the Torah. On Simchas Torah, we celebrate the fact that we do the Torah. There's a difference between accepting something and actually doing it. It's easy to accept something, to use it correctly and do it and live it. That is a different thing, and Sukkot is the yontif of joy, right? Of overt joy, what we call simcha b'poyel. Shavuos is simcha b'leiv, in the heart. And in fact, the Torah calls it that. The Torah says on Shavuos, "V'samachta l'fnei Hashem Elokecha," you shall celebrate with Hashem. That's from heart to heart. On Sukkot, it says, "V'samachta b'chagecha," you shall celebrate in your chag, in your festival, which means, and that's what we do on Sukkot. We party, we have a simchat beis, we dance with the Torah, the whole thing. It was a whole, and it said, "Mi shaloi nira sudas beis hasheva." Whoever saw the suda of the beis hasheva on the 3rd, 4th day, and 5th day of Sukkot in the Beis Hamikdash never saw simcha in their entire life. And that's the idea behind it, that the Torah, the simcha, is in its doing, and that is a difference in thing. But again, you see the juxtaposition that Shmini Atzeres, both on a philosophical basis and in some way with regard to Yom Tov Sheni Shel Goliath, and is it attached? And with regard to Tashlumin, has a lot of things that say it's really plugged in. It's like an extension cord to Sukkot. So it's an interesting dichotomy, and the Gemara recognized that Shmini Atzeres can be looked at many, many different ways. It's a fascinating, it's a much longer conversation. A much longer conversation. If I ever get down Shavuos to Boger and Tov, we'll have a whole conversation.
Good.
Anyway, so further, back again, we go further in the Gemara. The Ema Atzeres, but let's say it refers to Shavuos, which, by the way, why is Shavuos called Atzeres? Shmini Atzeres is the language that the Torah uses for Atzeres, for Shmini Atzeres. The Torah never calls Shavuos Atzeres. Rather, the Chazal calls Shavuos Atzeres. The Ramban explains, and the Rambam explains, and I'm really doing this in real short in one line, that Shavuos is really the last day of Pesach. In the words of the Ramban, Pesach is the first day of Yom Tov. The 7 weeks of the counting of the Sfira is Chol HaMoed, and Shavuos is the 8th day of Yom Tov for Pesach, because the whole purpose of going out of Mitzrayim wasn't the Exodus. The purpose was that we can now go and be Mekabel the Torah. We could be Mekabel the Torah. We could be Mekabel the Torah by Maimed HaSinai. Daddy, we're holding by 3A1. 3A1, the Ema Atzeres in the right-hand column. Gimel Amud Aleph, Atzeres. Okay? So, good morning. Good morning. So the Ema Atzeres. So again, we just explained a little bit why Chazal called Shavuos Atzeres, because as the Ramban explains, Shavuos is really the last day of Pesach. Okay, because the Torah doesn't call Shavuos Atzeres, the Chazal calls it, and it's a Ramban in Parshas Emor. But again, it's a much longer discussion, and so we'll get to it another time. Says the Gemara, Right, but maybe they Atzeres say that the pasuk is talking about Atzeres, and that's where you needed Uperisha Shiva and the 7 day sequestration Shli Yom Echad, who would be for the 1 day service of Shavuos. Amar Rav Abba, no. In Par Echad V'Ayil Echad, we derive from the avodah of one par, one bull, and one ram. That's Yom Kippur. Mi Par Echad V'Ayil Echad, from the Maluyim, the inauguration of Bayom Hashmini on the first day of Nisan in the second year in the Midbar, in the wilderness, which also they brought one par and one ayil. To the exclusion of Atzeres, of Shavuos, the Shnei Elamu, there were 2 rams that were brought in conjunction with the Lechem, with the Shnei HaLechem, that were brought with the 2 loaves that were brought specifically on Shavuos. Again, the 2 loaves were brought from Chodosh, from new grains, and with this, it allowed the Beis Hamikdash to start using new grains for the menachos for the rest of the year, for the grain offerings, for the meal offerings in the rest of the year. Now, so says the Gemara, that's good. Okay. If you agree that Yom Kippur has a similarity to the Miluyim, that it would consisted of one bull, a carbon seber bull, a communal bull, that's fine. That, I mean, not a bull, I'm sorry, ram. It could be that it's carbon seber ram. But according to the Madiyam, who said, in fact, there were 2 carbon seber rams brought on Yom Kippur. What would you say? Then in that case, Yom Kippur doesn't match up to the Meluyim, to the inauguration. So therefore, your whole argument falls away, and then we can say it doesn't mean Yom Kippur. It might mean Shavuos. Titania, because we learned Rabbi said, on Yom Kippur, there was only 1 carbon seber brought, 1 communal offering of a ram that was brought. This that it says in Sefer Vayikra is repeated again in Sefer Bamidbar. But the two psukim that are brought regarding this, one in Sefer Vayikra and one in Sefer Bamidbar, are all talking about the same 1 ayil ram that is brought for the carbon seber on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, says, Shnei Elamim. No, we're talking about 2 different rams. One over here in Sefer Vayikra and one in Sefer Bamidbar. So therefore, if there is two, then Yom Kippur is not a perfect match with the Miluyim, with the inauguration service, which is only one ram and 1 bull, 1 ayil and one par. But if that's the case, then who says that the comparison is Yom Kippur, just like the Miluyim was sequestered for 7 days? So does Yom Kippur. Maybe it's for Atzeres, maybe it's for Shavuos. Says the Gemara, even if you want to say like Rabbi Shimon, and we're dealing on Yom Kippur with 2 different ranks, awesome, over there in Yom Kippur. One was brought for the chayv of the day, meaning that the day had a special ram that was brought for the day, for the chayv of the day, the chad and something, and one for the musaf. What's pshat a musaf? A musaf means moisif. Musaf is a word for moisif, adding, which means I have my regular carbon tamid, I have my regular everyday carbon tamid, the everlasting tamid, the everyday lasting tamid, the tamid shall baik, the tamid shall bener abayim, and I'll be moisif. I add, just like I add on Shabbos, just like I add on Rosh Chodesh, just like I add on every other Yom Tov. I'm adding to my musaf. I'm adding to my tumit. La fuke atzeres to the exclusion of atzeres. The tavayu chayvus hayoim nitnu. That both rams are being brought for the obligation of the day of the shtei halechem. Each one of the loaves are getting its own individual ram. So the Miluyim, the inauguration was just like in Kippur. There was one. Well, even in other words, what we're saying like this. The Muslims have to do with the carbon tumid. Regarding the Chayvus Hayom, there's only one carbon you're bringing on Yom Kippur. Mashenkin on Shavuos, you're bringing two kabbanas for the Chayvus Hayom. That doesn't compare up to the Miluyim. We only brought one carbon for the Chayvus Hayom. So pray the Gemara.
Where is there lechaper atonement?
Right.
Shavuos. Where is there atonement for Shavuos? I don't get it.
Okay, so there is atonement for the Shavuos. The Shtei Alechem, that's it does say, because all the Yom Tovim are lechaper alechem. It always says over there. The Koyim, right? Even the carbon tumid.
But there's really no kapora there.
You might. It's communal. It might. First of all, every carbon tumid is lechaper. And that's lechaper tumid. So because the carbon tumid had many virtues of a chatos and many virtues of an oila.
Right.
It had both. So it was covering both hearer, thought process, and doing it with tameh and all that. So that's why the Gemara didn't go to that, to say it was mechaper. Second, the Miluyim, the inauguration, had the same idea, Daddy. It didn't actually come to be mechaper. It wasn't Yom Kippur. It was the first day of Nisan, right? The first day of Nisan. There was a component of atonement, but that was not the idea of the day. So we have to be very, remember at the end of the day, we're always comparing to what? To the original sequestration. What was the original sequester? The inauguration. So we have to, you're right, what you said, but then you run into a problem with the original comparison. It all has to roll back to, where do we see sequester? We only see sequester in one place. We're only comparing everything back to that. So, pray the Gemara, the Ema Rosh Hashanah, but let's say it refers to Rosh Hashanah again, even though we hold Rosh Hashanah as 2 days. In reality, Rosh Hashanah is 1 day, even though in Eretz Yisrael, they also hold 2 days because of Yoma Richta. That's because we're not sure, nobody is sure, if when El ends, will the witnesses come to say they saw the new moon or not in time and all that. So automatically just held Rosh Hashanah for 2 days. But in reality, Rosh Hashanah is 1 day.
Right.
The aim, even though everywhere, even in Eretz Yisrael, we hold 2 days, but that's because of
Yoma Richta.
The Yoma Richta. Right. The Yoma Richta. Right. But that's only because we're not sure because it's the first day of the month, and I don't know when the first day of the month is going to be established, even in Eretz Yisrael. So we cover ourselves, but that's just covering ourselves. Everybody agrees it's only 1 day. The Ema Rosh Hashanah, the Perisha Shiva L'Yoynachanu, which would be a sequestration from Chafei Elul, 7-day sequestration, and for the 1 day service in the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara, done in Parva Ayil Shalai, we derive the Kohen Gadol's Par and Ayil, bull and ram on Yom Kippur, mi Parva Ayil Shalai, from the Kohen Gadol's bull and ram in the Miluyim, in the inauguration service, that Aaron brought him from his own money. La Fuke Atzeret for Rosh Hashanah, to the exclusion of the Avodah on Shavuot and Rosh Hashanah, the Tzibur Ninu, which is exclusively carbon tzibur, exclusively communal offerings. And the Gemara says it's not a fact. This is all good. According to the Ma'amad Yoma that says, Kach lecha, when the pasuk says, take for yourself, it means mishalecha, from your own money. We're now on Amid Bays, Gimel Amid Bays 3b1. Or when it says aseilecha, make for yourself, mishalecha, like the Mishnah says, aseilecha rav, make for yourself a rav. The chiyuv is on you to go and find a person that you could attach yourself to say, this is my rav. But according to the one that says that even when it says kach lecha and asay lecha, it still means communal funds, i.e., from the shkolim. What are you going to say? Because we learned in a brayso, kach lecha, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, make kach lecha, take for yourself, mishel lecha, from your own funds. Asay lecha, make for yourself, mishel lecha, from your own funds. But when it says v'yikhu elecha, and they shall take for you, that's mishel tzibur, that comes from communal funds. Divrei Rabbi Yoshia, Rabbi Nosson Oimer, bein kach lecha, bein v'yikhu elecha, whether it's take for yourself or they shall take for you, right? Says, what do you call it? Mishel tzibur. It's from communal funds. It's from the shkolim. So why does the Torah say take for yourself? Torah is say, it's as if Hashem is telling Moshe, I prefer yours, Moshe, to theirs. I rather it was coming from you, the individual, than from the community.
From the community.
And the Gemara explains. In one pasuk it says, and you shall make for yourself a wooden ark, i.e. the Aron HaKodesh in Sefer Devarim. The gods of Echad also Aron Atzei Shitim, and they shall make an ark, an Aron of Shitim wood, which is in Shemais. So make up your mind. What is it? Is it Moshe Rabbeinu making the Aron? Or is it Klal Yisrael making the Aron? Okay, Tzad. The second pasuk is when Klal Yisrael is doing the will of the Holy One, blessed be His name. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing the will of our Father in heaven. In that case, it says also Aron Atzei Shitim, and they shall make for me an Aron. The first pasuk is where they're not doing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chas v'Sholem. And it says, and you shall make for yourself a wooden ark. But the thing is, because Moshe Rabbeinu is the manig of Klal Yisrael, is the Raya Mehemda, the faithful shepherd of his flock of Klal Yisrael, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you shall make it, he represents the rest of Klal Yisrael, and he in his mind says, we are making it. And that, of course, is the whole idea of a Rav in a shul. A Rav in a shul, or a Rebbe by Chassidim, the idea is that's the idea of making a manik. That when we can't reach the ideal, we hold on to them. So this is a famous story with the Bluzheva. With Zechena Levrochem. The Bluzheva Rebbe, one time during World War II, the Nazis dug this huge this huge pit, and they pulled two people out. One was the Bluzheva, and one was a Frei who kept nothing. A guy who was a secular Jew, not kept Shabbos and all that, and they found themselves together in the concentration camp. The Nazis said, if you two could jump over this huge pit, okay, we won't shoot you. But if you jump and you land in the pit, that's it. We're shooting the two of you. So the Bluzheva closed his eyes, ran, and jumped. And when he opened his eyes, he saw that he was on the other side of the pit. And he looks to his side, and lo and behold, the secular Jew was was standing right next to him. He also somehow made it over this giant pit. So the Bluzheva said, so the secular Jew asked the Bluzheva, how did you get over the pit? So he said, I closed my eyes and I jumped. And my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather, the previous Bluzheva Rebbes, came and carried me over the pit. But how did you get over the pit? So he said, Rabbi, I held on to you. That's how I get it. You held on to your forefathers. I held on to you. Famous story in Bluzheva. But that's the idea. The idea is asay l'chorach, because the Rav is as much part of the community as the community is the Rav. So, what do we see over here? That according to Rav Yonason, there's no raya, there's no proof that the Kohen Gadol had to bring any kabbanis from his own funds. It all came from community funds. It's just a matter of language when we're doing the will of Hashem, when we're not doing the will of Hashem. But it comes from community funds. So says the Gemara, Ad kan loy pligi. They didn't argue. Ela bekichas balmu v'asiyas balmu. It's only they only argued in the words of taking in general and making in general. Kach lecha v'sisa lecha. Kichas da'alma kach lecha samin. Taking in general, for an example, take for yourself spices. Right? They're arguing whether Moshe had to take the spices from his own funds or from the shkol of the community funds. Make for yourself 2 silver trumpets, right, which they used in the Mishkan and the base of English to announce things, right? So the question, they're arguing whether Moshe had to pay for this with his own money or whether it came from the community's funds. Aval Hanach, but the cases of Yom Kippur and the Miluyim, the inauguration, Pirish Kamafaris Mishalahu. The pasuk is clear that it needed to come from his own funds. By Miluyim it says, and to the children of Yisrael you shall speak, saying, take a he-goat for a chatos. Yomi Aaron, and the previous pasuk says, Yomi Aaron kach lecha egel ben baka lechatos lomali. Why does the previous pasuk say, take for yourself a young bull for a chatos? When did you just say afterwards a klal yisrael should bring a chatos? I learned from here that Aaron had to take
from his own fund.
From his own funds. Now let's see about Yom Kippur. B'yom HaKippurim mechti. Ksiv, b'zois, with this. Yavai Aaron el HaKodesh. By the way, Zois is 40, if you look at this, is 4, Bizois is 410. This was hidden in the Torah that the first base of Mikdash would stand for 410 years. Bizois, which equals in Gematria exactly 410, Bizois, 410 years, Yavai Aaron el HaKodesh. That Aaron will come into the Kodesh. And so for 410 years, the Aaron HaKodesh stood in the Kodesh HaKadosh. Bizois, Yavai Aaron el HaKodesh, the Parber Bakol HaChatas. With this, shall Aaron come into the holy, into the Heichel, with the young bull for a Chatas. And it's written further, and from Klal Yisrael, from the congregation of the children of Israel, you should take 2 male goats for a chatos. Then why do I need the next pasuk that says, and Aaron shall bring a bull chatos that is for himself? That this phrase for himself actually means from his own funds. Turns out that on Yom Kippur, Aaron had to bring from his own funds, and at the Miluyim, at the inauguration, he had to bring from his own funds. We now have a comparison, Miluyim to Yom Kippur. Just like the Miluyim, the Kohen Gadol had to be sequestered for 7 days. So to the Yom Kippur, he has to be sequestered for 7 days. Rav Ashi Yoma, Rav Ashi said, I'll tell you something else. I'll give you another one. Done in Parla Chatas Va'ayla. We derive where the avoid of the service is a par for a chatas, a bull for a chatas v'ayla, and a ram for an oila. Yom Kippur. Mi Parla Chatas Va'ayla. From the inauguration, the Miluyim, which had the exact same thing, a bull for a chatas and a ram for an oila. La'afuke Rosh Hashanah B'Atzeres, to the exclusion of Rosh Hashanah and Shavuos, and we're on 3B2. 3B2, and this is going until the end of 3B2 is where we're going to go today with the Tavayu oilers. Where both sacrifices, the ram and the bull, are oilers. Because for the Shtei Alechem, two kabbanas that were brought in conjunction with the Shtei Alechem are oilers. There are no chatas. Since there are no chatas, you got it. Now, another reason would be, because like we said before, Shavuos is the yontif between man and Hashem. V'samachta lifnei Hashem Elokecha. You shall be joyful in front of Hashem your God, as opposed to Sukkot, which says v'samachta b'chagecha. You should be joyful in your holiday, which is the simcha b'poyel, outwardly, overtly, as opposed to the heart. What's the heart? Thought. The oila comes to forgive on thought. The oila comes to forgive on hearer, on what's going on in your head, in your heart. So therefore, it's apropos to be in the yontif that is designated for simchas halev, joy of the heart. Ravina Amar, Ravina says, done in avodah b'koyin gadol, we derive from the avodah of the koyin gadol on Yom Kippur. The avodah is the koyin gadol from a service that also had to exclusively be done with the koyin gadol, i.e., Aaron the koyin gadol at the Miluyim by Yom HaShmini at the inauguration. La'afuke kulei kushasayin, as opposed to all the questions that we've had for the last stop, the lava void and the koyin gadol, which were not services that exclusively had to be done by the koyin gadol. Any koyin could have done them. The ones that are exclusive to the koyin gadol is obviously the avodah of the Yom Kippur, and clearly the avodah of the Miluyim. The ikedi amri amar Ravina, done in avodah techila, me avodah techila. We derive the first service from the first service, la'afuke hani delav techila ninu, from those that we asked before, which are not the first service. What are we talking about? My techila. It's the first ever that was done by a koyin gadol. Clearly, the Miluyim, which is actually the very first day of any avodah, was clearly done by the koyin gadol. And Yom Kippur, which is the one time a year that the koyin gadol goes lifnai ulifnim, goes behind the curtain by the kodesh hakadoshim, is clearly only done by the koyin gadol. But says the Gemara, that's not what you're coming to tell me. Hainu kamaisa. That's exactly what you said before. What do you call it? Dinin done in avoidus b'koyin gadol, the avoidus b'koyin gadol, la'afuke b'kulin koshin, the lav avoidus b'koyin gadol middle. So you don't need to repeat that. You just said that Yom Kippur is the avodah that's done by the koyin gadol. The Miluyim was the one that's done by the koyin gadol versus everywhere else it doesn't need the koyin gadol. So what are you coming to teach me here in the second version? Ella avodah techila b'makar. It means that it's the service that's the first to be performed in a particular place. They avoided techila b'makom for another service that was the first to be performed in a particular place. On Yom Kippur, it is the one time of year that an avodah is done in the kodesh hakadoshim, in the holy of holies, otherwise known as lifnai ulifnim, from inside the inside. So, all right, and the Miluyim was the very first time any avodah was done. So therefore, that's a much better comparison versus something that's done many more times over. Now the Gemara goes back to where we had the Gemara the other day that said, "Kasher osa by Yom hazeh," just like it was done on that day. Siva Hashem commanded Lasais Lechaper Aleichem to attain atonement for them. Ki also Rabbi Yoma, Rabbi came to Paul from Eretz Yisrael. He said, Rabbi Yochanan Masnei Chodo. Rabbi Yochanan learned one thing from this pasuk. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Masnei Tarte. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi learned two. Rabbi Yochanan Masnei Chodo. Rabbi Yochanan learned one. Lasois lechaper elu ma'aseh Yom Kippurim. This is, we're talking about Yom Kippur. He's only learning it one. In other words, he learns one sequestration from this pasuk. That what? For Yom Kippur, the Kohen required to be sequestered for 7 days. Rabbi Yochanan does not learn from this pasuk anything to do with the Para Aduma. He has no knowledge about the Para Aduma requiring sequestration at this point in the game. Okay? All right, says the Gemara, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Masna Tarte. And Rabbi Shua ben Levi learns two. Lasais elu masis maisi para. Lasais to do is the service of the paraduma, requiring a 7-day sequestration to be sequestered 7 days. L'chavre elu maisi Yom Kippur, then you have to sequester for 7 days even on Yom Kippur. Pray to Gemara immediately. Rabbi Yochanan Masni Chada. Are you telling me Rabbi Yochanan only learns one thing, only Yom Kippur, and not paraduma? But not tonight, but we learned in our Mishnah. Shivas Yomim Kaidim Yom Kippur. The Shivas Yomim Kaidim Sarei B'Zapara. 7 days before the burning of the para. So what is this? There are two requirements of sequestration. One on Yom Kippur and one on the Para Aduma. How could Rabbi Yochanan say it's only on Yom Kippur? Says the Gemara, Ma'ala B'Alma. Rabbi Yochanan holds that the Para Aduma sequestering is only rabbinical in nature. It is not biblical. It is not a d'oraisa dikadin. So pray to Gemara, is that a fact? Ba'amarab man Yomi bar chilki amarab chasa baraidi. B'minir man Yomi ben chalik. It said in the name of chasa baraidi. Amarab Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Kasha also b'yom hazeh. Just as he did on this day, Tziva Hashem commanded Lasais, L'chaper Aleichem commanded to atone for you. Lasais, Elu Ma'aseh Para, L'chaper Elu Ma'aseh Yom Kippurim. So you see, Rabbi Yochanan clearly does agree that even Yom Kippur
That's just two things.
is a biblical obligation to sequester for 7 days. Tomorrow, no, that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, this is Ahu de Rabbi. This follows the view of Rabbi Yochanan's Rebbe. But Rabbi Yochanan himself disagreed. He also Rabbi of Rabbi Yochanan, the Shum Rabbi Yishmael. For Rabbi came from Eretz Yisrael, quoted Rabbi Yochanan, who reported in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Lasais elu ma'aseh para l'chaper elu ma'aseh Yom Kippurim. This refers to the 7 day Purim. So in other words, it's a quote of his Rebbe's opinion that biblically even the paraduma requires 7 days sequestering. Ma'aseh Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. He says only Yom Kippur requires on a biblical level sequestration, but on a rabbinical level, the paraduma. Very good. This is where we're stopping because it's the beginning of a longer sugya. We're up to Amalei Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan is going to ask on this regarding the sequestering of Yom Kippur. This is where we'll begin tomorrow. We'll begin tomorrow from over here. Amalei Reish Lakish, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines from the bottom of Gimel on the base, and we will Amit Hashem get tomorrow into Dalit on the base.